Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your passport to the stories that matter, globe showing Europe, Africa. I'm thrilled you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the world. Chapter 1, A Quiet Invitation. Hercule Poirot was enjoying the gentle tranquility of his morning ritual in his flat at Whitehaven Mansions, an exquisitely brewed cup of Darjeeling, the morning paper unfolded with precise folds, when a discreet knock sounded at his door. It was his trusty concierge, Henri, bearing a single, heavy envelope sealed with deep green wax. Poirot's keen gaze lifted from his cup as Henri bowed and presented the missive. The envelope was of thick ivory-laid paper, its texture cool and almost imperceptibly ridged under the fingers. Embossed upon the wax seal was a regal eagle, wings outstretched, an emblem Poirot had not encountered before. With the utmost care, he broke the seal and extracted the letter, noting the elegant, slightly elongated loops of the handwriting. Settling into his high-backed chair, Poirot began to read. The letter was penned in English, but with a faint continental flourish, one that bespoke careful schooling abroad. It read, Monsieur Poirot, it is with the greatest respect and a measure of urgency that I request your presence at Trentham Manor, Somerset, to advise upon a matter of the utmost delicacy. A family heirloom of considerable sentimental and monetary value has disappeared. I trust your incomparable talents will bring both solace and solution to a household in distress. Yours faithfully, Marigold Trentham. Even before finishing, Poirot's little grey cells were alight. He observed the slight indentation around one of the uppercase MS, suggesting the writer's gauntlet-style pen grip. The paper bore a faint watermark, a griffin. He rose, smoothing his impeccably tailored grey morning coat, and replaced his slippers with polished black shoes. Merci, Henri, he said in his softly accented English, extending the letter for a final review. Please ensure my luggage is packed, light evening wear, suitable for a country house, and my measuring tape. Henri backed away with a courteous bow, leaving Poirot to prepare for departure. By mid-morning, Poirot was aboard the 10:15 express from Paddington Station, bound for Somerset. The train's rhythmic clatter and the steady hiss of steam were a familiar comfort. As the English countryside unfurled, lush green fields dotted with grazing sheep, ancient oaks stretching skywards, Poirot allowed his mind to ponder the particulars. A stolen heirloom, hidden in a private cabinet, according to the letter. He imagined the pendant itself, perhaps a cluster of black diamonds arranged in the shape of a nightingale? The mind's eye conjured possibilities, each more tantalizing than the last. Yet Poirot reminded himself, imagination must yield to evidence, and evidence is found only through meticulous observation and calm reflection. Upon disembarking at the gentle station of Glastonbury Cross, Poirot's portly frame attracted polite glances. He was met by Lady Marigold's carriage, black, but for its silver crest, a stylized nightingale perched upon an open scroll. The coachman tipped his top hat, and Poirot climbed the 2 shallow steps, his cane tapping softly as he seated himself. The journey to Trentham Manor was scarcely 20 minutes, yet every moment revealed more about his host. The road curved alongside hedgerows blooming with wild roses, hedgehogs scuttled at the edge of the verge. The air carried a hint of damp earth and the faintest trace of violet from a cluster of flowers beside the drive. Trentham Manor appeared as a vision of Georgian elegance, its pale stone façade warmed by the afternoon sun. Tall sash windows reflected the sky, each framed by climbing ivy. A gravel forecourt lay bordered by clipped box hedges, and beyond, the rolling Somerset hills created a gentle amphitheatre around the house. Poirot noted, with approval, the precise geometry of the topiary and the absence of any stray weeds, evidence of fastidious household management. As he alighted, the carriage door opened to reveal Lady Marigold Trentham. She was tall and slender, dressed in a cream silk day frock with an intricately embroidered bodice. Her dark hair was swept back, exposing a delicate throat. Yet despite her composure, Poirot noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she extended it in greeting. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth like fine porcelain. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." She led him through the entrance hall, where tapestries depicting pastoral scenes lined the walls. White marble busts, Roman senators and Greek philosophers, stood in niches between columns. Poirot's eyes flicked briefly to the inlaid marble floor, noting that one stone near the staircase bore a faint scuff mark. He committed it to memory. Lady Marigold ushered him into the drawing room, its tall windows draped with heavy velvet curtains of midnight blue. The furniture was arranged with symmetrical precision. A pair of velvet settees flanked a mahogany writing desk, upon which sat fresh flowers in a cut glass vase. A silver tea service gleamed on a side table. As Henri discreetly poured the tea, lapsang souchong, Poirot's own favorite, Lady Marigold seated herself opposite him. She explained, her voice quavering slightly, that her treasured pendant, the so-called Ebon Nightingale, had vanished from her private cabinet the previous night. She described it as a small yet exquisite piece, black onyx shaped like a nightingale in mid-song, its eye a single ruby. It was an heirloom, she said, in the family for generations, rumored to have belonged to a French duchess in the 18th century before passing into Trentham hands. Tonight, she had intended to wear it to an intimate dinner, but upon unlocking her cabinet, she discovered the velvet lining disturbed, the jewel gone. Poirot listened with serene attention. His moustaches twitched ever so slightly as he considered her words. "Madam," he said, "I must examine this cabinet at once. Every detail, however trivial it may seem, can prove decisive." He rose and followed her through a pair of panelled doors into a smaller room, the boudoir. It was furnished with a delicate writing desk, a chaise longue upholstered in pale rose, and, against the far wall, a tall cabinet of polished mahogany. Poirot approached the lock and ran a thumb lightly over its surface. There were no scratches or signs of forced entry. He knelt to inspect the floor. A single footprint had been pressed into the polish of the wooden floorboard, though the adjacent carpet normally concealed it. He noted as well the faintest trace of violet perfume lingering in the air. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The thief, or thieves, have been careful to avoid technical violence, yet they have left this footprint and the scent." Standing, he produced a small notebook, in which he jotted the footprint's exact dimensions and drew a simple sketch of the lock mechanism. He then retrieved a small glass vial from his coat pocket. Vial and cork were ready for samples, and uncorked it to collect a drop of the perfume residue. All the while, Lady Marigold's eyes followed him with a blend of hope and anxiety. Returning to the settee, Poirot folded his hands across his waistcoat. "Madam, I shall require a list of all those who have access to this room, attendants, friends, any who might possess both motive and opportunity. And please, let discretion prevail. We must prevent panic. The revelation of this theft must be managed carefully, lest the thief feel cornered and act rashly." Lady Marigold nodded, her relief palpable despite her continued distress. Drawing close, Poirot offered a gentle smile. "You have done wisely in summoning me, madam. Together, we shall uncover the truth of the Ebon Nightingale's disappearance." Outside, the Somerset wind rustled the ivy against the windows, as though echoing Poirot's promise. And so, amid the hushed elegance of Trentham Manor, the game was afoot. Poirot's mind, ever methodical and precise, had already begun to unravel the hidden threads of intrigue that would guide him to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 2, The Locked Cabinet. Night had fallen over Trentham Manor when Hercule Poirot, escorted by Lady Marigold's silent housekeeper, Mrs. Peabody, returned to the scene of the crime. The oil lamp beside the mahogany cabinet threw tall, flickering shadows across the polished parquet, lending the room an atmosphere of hushed intrigue. Poirot's eyes, dark and observant, flitted from wall to floor, from lock to lintel. He moved with deliberate grace, every gesture purposeful, as though drawing attention to each detail for the sake of his own exacting scrutiny. "Madam has retired for the night," Mrs. Peabody whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustle of her starched apron. "I have brought only the essentials, monsieur." She laid a small silver tray at Poirot's elbow, upon which rested a tiny steel mirror, a soft bristled brush, and white gloves. Poirot thanked her with a slight nod and set to work. First, he addressed the lock itself. It was of fine English craftsmanship, the brass unblemished save for a faint discoloration around the keyhole's rim. Poirot slipped on his gloves, then ran a slender probing tool into the mechanism. The tumblers yielded with gentle compliance, no sign of forced entry, no splintered wood or bent metal. Poirot murmured, so the perpetrator possessed both patience and skill. He withdrew a single hair, grey, but unusually stiff, from the lock's innermost chamber, placing it in a small glass vial. Next, he knelt to inspect the floorboards. Where the oriental carpet had been carefully lifted, a solitary footprint marked the polished oak. His measuring tape emerged, a slender, retractable device of which he was particularly fond, and he recorded the print's length and width to the nearest millimeter. "Size 6, he declared softly to himself, and the sole pattern reveals a custom heel, squat and unadorned. Likely not an off-the-peg shoe." He gently dusted the edges of the print with a fine powder, obscured to the casual eye but now accentuating the ridge of the sole, then captured a precise fingerprint impression using a small strip of plastidust. As he worked, Poirot inhaled deeply. The room bore several scents, the faintest trace of Lady Marigold's violet perfume, an undertone of warmed varnish from the cabinet, and, most intriguing, a hint of leather. Leather, perhaps from gloves worn in the commission of the theft. He made a note in his ever-present notebook, leather trace, pair gloves. Once the footprint and lock had been documented, Poirot turned a careful eye to the cabinet's interior. The velvet lining lay slumped to one side, its soft pile had been disturbed, leaving diagonal creases as though something heavy had been hastily slipped out. On the shelf beneath, he discovered a single black feather. It was small, no larger than a sparrow's quill, but stained, as if dipped in ink. He retrieved it with gloved fingers, rolling it between his fingertips to detect any further residue. A few specks of fine grit adhered to the shaft, pale grit, like that of crumbling limestone. "Curious," he murmured. "Not the gravel of the forecourt. Perhaps the terrace behind the east wing, where the stone balustrades have wept their lichen." He pocketed the feather in a small envelope, sealing it carefully. Having exhausted this stage of examination, Poirot rose and surveyed the rest of the boudoir. He noted 3 low windows, each fitted with heavy damask curtains. The middle window was latched, the other 2, though closed, bore small draughts of cool night air, evidence that they had been opened and resealed. Poirot paused by the window nearest the cabinet. He drew back the curtain and peered onto the gravel path below. There, moonlight illuminated a shallow groove across the stones, long enough for a small wheel. He crouched to inspect, pressing a gloved palm against the ground. "A wheeled sack or perhaps a small handcart," he observed. Brushing aside a tendril of ivy, Poirot discovered an old iron ring set into the wall, likely a remnant from the manor's days as a coaching inn. He tapped it with his cane, it emitted a hollow clang. Obviously, someone had leveraged it to scale the wall or brace a ladder. Yet why all this effort, when the lock bore no sign of force? Poirot's moustaches twitched. We are dealing with someone who meant to appear invisible, and yet left this labyrinth of clues. Returning to the center of the room, Poirot tapped his cane lightly against the floorboards. Each tap resonated differently, solid oak here, hollow space there. He walked the perimeter, pausing at the writing desk. The green leather blotter was askew, its corner lifted revealed a single long-stemmed rose petal, pressed and dried. He pocketed it, knowing each seemingly minor element could prove pivotal. Satisfied that he had gleaned all visible clues, Poirot crossed to the doorway. "Madame's cabinet is not alone in concealing secrets," he said to Mrs. Peabody, who watched with tight-lipped composure. "Tomorrow, I shall inspect the adjoining rooms, the morning room, the library, even the servants' quarters. For crime respects no boundary of floor or feather." Mrs. Peabody inclined her head. "I shall see that Monsieur has full access, sir." Before retiring to his own suite, Poirot requested a small tray of water and a white handkerchief. He retreated to a corner of the boudoir, away from draughts, and methodically washed the hair he extracted from the lock, the powder from the footprint, and the grit from the feather. Each sample was cleaned, dried, and stored in separate glass tubes, meticulously labeled by date and place. He set them on the tray under the lamp's warm glow, then studied them one by one through a hand lens. Footprint powder, fine china mound, he noted. Lock hair, natural grey, coarse, possibly moustache hair. Feather grit, stone from East Terrace. He chuckled softly. Monsieur Osborne's golf bag is stored in precisely that spot. He practices putting at dawn. He wears size 6 bespoke boots. The plot thickens. His moustaches twitched with satisfaction. Poirot wiped his notes clean and replaced his gloves in their silver case. The lamp's wick burned low, yet his eyes burned bright with anticipation. He would sleep little, too many questions swirled in his mind. How had the thief discovered the secret of the cabinet's internal latch? Who possessed both familiarity with the manor's architecture and boldness to exploit it? And why leave a stolen feather behind? Ascending the broad staircase, Poirot paused on the halfway landing. He noted the runner's slight shift to one side, as if trailed by hurried footsteps. A small depression in the carpet's fringe caught his eye. Beneath it, the polished wood bore a tiny scuff. He made a mental sketch, then pressed on until he reached his guest room, where his small trunk awaited. As he removed his coat, Poirot reflected aloud, "The Ebon Nightingale is lost, for now. But my little grey cells shall conjure its path through this maze of motive and mechanism. Let the night be long, for tomorrow, the game begins in earnest." And with that, Poirot extinguished the lamp and lay upon the crisp linen, mind racing through every fragment of evidence. The locked cabinet had revealed its secrets, secrets which only he, with his methodical approach and unwavering attention to detail, could decipher. In the stillness of Trentham Manor, the detective slept, but only for a few hours, before the next dawn would bring fresh opportunities for revelation. Chapter 3, Faces in the Parlour. The following morning, Poirot summoned the Trentham household to the oak-panelled parlour at 10:30. The drawing-room's windows were thrown wide to admit the crisp Somerset air, and the sunlight revealed motes dancing above the patterned carpet. A wicker tray held Earl Grey tea, delicate finger sandwiches, and Petit's fours. Lady Marigold lingered by the mantelpiece, her face pale but composed. Mr. Osborne, the elderly controller, sat stiffly in a wing-back chair, spectacles poised at the tip of his nose. Miss Vivian Trentham moved restlessly by the French doors, smoothing the skirt of her pale pink dress. Colonel Armitage, broad-shouldered and bearing a slight limp, stood near the window. Mrs. Peabody hovered discreetly behind the tea station. Poirot surveyed the room with a smile that did not quite reach his keen eyes. "Madam," he began, inclining his head to Lady Marigold, "thank you for assembling the household. I propose we converse frankly, so that I may understand who had opportunity, and perhaps motive, to enter the boudoir last night." He settled into a chair, steepling his fingers beneath his waxed moustaches. Let us begin by recalling routines. Who among us visited the boudoir yesterday between daylight and darkness? Miss Vivian was the first to speak. I borrowed a shawl from my aunt's wardrobe, she said, her voice quavering slightly. I wished to practice a new aria in the music room and thought a shawl might keep me warm. I did not see the cabinet door open, nor touch the lock. She glanced towards Mrs. Peabody, who offered a silent nod of confirmation. Yet Poirot noted the faintest purple stain on the left glove of Miss Vivian's right hand, too dark, he thought, to belong to the rose-tinted lining of the boudoir settee. Colonel Armitage cleared his throat. I passed by the boudoir on my way to the library for a spot of reading. I thought I heard a rustle of curtains, but I attributed it to the wind and carried on. He gestured to his boots. My boots gained mud on the terrace outside during my morning walk. I apologize if they appear untidy. Poirot observed a small globule of pale gravel lodged in the turf tread, identical to the residue found on the feather and carpet creases of the cabinet room. Mrs. Peabody then spoke, her hands clasped in front of her. I delivered Lady Marigold's night dress and suggested she retire early. I have been with the family these past 12 years and would never raise a hand to dishonor them. Her voice was steady, but Poirot detected the slight tremor of her right thumb as she adjusted her starched cuffs. Forgive my intrusion, she added, but when I passed the boudoir door just after dinner, I fancied I caught the faintest sound of metal against metal, as though someone had adjusted a lock. Mrs. Peabody then spoke, her hands clasped in front of her. I delivered Lady Marigold's night dress and suggested she retire early. I have been with the family these past 12 years and would never raise a hand to dishonor them. Her voice was steady, but Poirot detected the slight tremor of her right thumb as she adjusted her starched cuffs. Forgive my intrusion, she added, but when I passed the boudoir door just after dinner, I fancied I caught the faintest sound of metal against metal, as though someone had adjusted a lock. Mr. Osborne wheezed and adjusted his spectacles. I interrupted Lady Marigold's accounting session and requested clarification on certain ledgers. We argued briefly, you might say, over expenditure. She insisted on reducing the household's allowances, and I protested that the staff required their comforts. He cleared his throat again. Afterwards, I went to my study to balance the books. I had no need nor desire to enter the boudoir. Poirot made a slow, deliberate jotting in his notebook. The detective rose and crossed to the mantel, upon which rested a silver salver and porcelain teacups. He lifted a cup and inhaled. This tea bears the fragrance of bergamot, not violet. Yet last night I perceived a faint violet note in the boudoir. He fixed his gaze on Miss Vivian. Might these gloves be the source? Vivian looked down at her gloves and slowly peeled off the left one. Beneath, her wrist was unblemished, but the glove's fingertips bore an inky smudge. Oh, that, she stammered. I spilled ink while practicing a calligraphy exercise. I apologize, I ought to have changed them. Poirot noted the inconsistency. Ink is darker, thicker. Where, then, did the violet scent originate? He rose and retrieved the black feather from his pocket, placing it upon the salver. This feather, my friends, is the nightingale's own. Yet the bird remains missing, and the feather bears traces of soot, coal dust, I think. He tapped the feather with his cane. Who among us keeps a hearth burning late into the night? Silence ensued, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Each person shifted uneasily, their carefully constructed alibis showing tiny cracks. Poirot replaced the feather and bowed gracefully. Thank you all for your candor. I ask you now to continue your days as normal, but I shall require access to each of your quarters later. Pray, do not feel alarmed, the criminal mind loves complacency, and I shall see that no detail escapes you, or me." With that, he turned his back upon them, stepping towards the window. Lady Marigold followed, concern etched across her brow. "Monsieur Poirot, do you have a suspicion?" He turned, his gaze kindly. "Madam," he said, "insight must await evidence. But fear not. The faces in this parlor have told me much, far more than their words alone. Soon, all will be revealed." As the household dispersed, each to their separate anxieties, Poirot remained by the open window, peering across the manicured lawns. His mind raced through the motives, the misleading clues, the hushed confessions, and one name began to sing more clearly than the rest. Chapter 4, Whispers and Red Herrings. That evening, Trentham Manor's dining room was lit by low chandeliers, their crystals scattering warm light over the polished mahogany table. A gentle hush fell as Lady Marigold, resplendent in a silk gown of deep emerald, rose to speak before the meal. Hercule Poirot, seated at the head, observed each face in turn, Miss Vivian Trentham across from him, her hands neatly folded, Colonel Armitage to his right, upright and watchful, Mr. Osborne stiff in his seat, Mrs. Peabody demure at the foot. Even the footmen and housemaids, stationed at discreet intervals, sensed the tension beneath the ritual of dinner. "Before we dine," Lady Marigold began, "I feel I should explain more fully the nature of the Ebon Nightingale's value, to some beyond mere ornament." She paused, clearing her throat. "You will recall that upon my great-uncle's death, a codicil to my aunt's will was discovered, granting the pendant to my niece, Miss Vivian, upon my passing. It was an unexpected bequest, and I confess I have since regretted its stipulations. For peace of mind, I amended my will again, restoring sole ownership to myself. That change was sealed only last week." A murmur rippled around the table. Miss Vivian's face, framed by gentle waves of chestnut hair, paled momentarily before she forced a polite smile. Colonel Armitage shifted in his seat, his polished medals caught the chandelier's light. Poirot's moustaches quivered lightly, in his mind, each subtle reaction was an indelible clue. "Surely, my dear," Colonel Armitage said with a genial nod, "no family feud could endure over a trinket, however beautiful. Your kindness towards Miss Vivian has always been evident." His voice was smooth, yet Poirot detected the faintest edge of impatience beneath the cordial tone. Vivian offered a poised acknowledgement. "I am grateful for my aunt's generosity. Yet, I would never breach her trust or that of this family." Her gloved hands gripped the stem of her wine glass, too tightly, thought Poirot. A single drop of red wine trembled on the rim. Meanwhile, Mr. Osborne cleared his throat. "Business concerns have pressed on my mind, but I assure you, Lady Marigold, my loyalty remains steadfast." He bowed his head, motioning to the footman to refill his water glass. The servant hesitated before obeying, another sign of the household's underlying strain. Poirot sipped his consommé thoughtfully. The broth was seasoned with a hint of tarragon, an unusual choice for this part of the country, but perfectly prepared. He noted the subtle details as he set down the spoon. His gaze fell upon Mrs. Peabody, who wore a somber expression. She had served with the Trentham family for more than a decade, and her loyalty to Lady Marigold was beyond question. Yet Poirot saw her fingers brush a hidden locket beneath her lace collar, as if seeking reassurance. As dinner progressed, the conversation turned to lighter topics, the fine vintages, the prospect of summer storms in the Mendips, and the anticipated arrival of a visiting cousin next week. But Poirot's mind remained fixed on the pendant, and on the curious events of that day. He delighted in the interplay of motives and misdirections, for to catch a thief one must first permit him to lead his pursuer astray. Halfway through dessert, lemon syllabub with candied peel, Colonel Armitage addressed Poirot directly. "Monsieur, may I ask if you have had occasion to explore the terrace this afternoon? I discovered something curious while strolling. He gave a slight cough and cast his eyes towards the window, where moonlight silvered the neatly clipped box hedges. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, Colonel, I did. The gravel path bears fresh impressions, the stones themselves have shifted somewhat. He paused, allowing the remark to settle. You mentioned earlier that your boots were muddied from the gravel. Might the owner of size 6 bespoke boots have traversed the terrace under moonlight? He regarded Armitage with deliberate calm. The Colonel's brow furrowed. It was I, of course, but only to admire the night sky. I assure you I touched nothing else. The firmness of his tone suggested sincerity, yet Poirot recalled the fine limestone grit found upon the stolen feather in the cabinet. It matched precisely the stones on the terrace steps. Just then, a discreet rustling came from the door. A footman announced, "The gardener, sir, awaits your leave to enter." At Poirot's nod, the young man, smudged trousers and worn boots, stepped forward. He was a slight, nervous youth named Felix, whose duties rarely extended beyond pruning and weeding. Poirot's little grey cells immediately noted the gardener's demeanour, shifting eyes, a faint odour of earth on his cuffs. "Tell me, Felix," Poirot said kindly, "when did you last carry soil or plant cuttings along the east terrace?" The gardener swallowed. "This afternoon, sir, I was transplanting marigolds near the balustrade." He hesitated. "I thought I saw something black tumble from the boudoir window, but I dared not approach." His confession hung in the air. A hint of genuine fear crossed his face, but was it fear of the unknown, or fear of a guilty conscience? Left in the dimly lit dining room, Poirot allowed himself a moment to reflect. The codicil had supplied a motive for Miss Vivian, yet her agitation seemed earnest rather than deceitful. Colonel Armitage's casual stroll on the terrace aligned with the limestone residue, but why release a feather from the corridor? Mrs. Peabody's trembling heart bespoke devotion, but perhaps also fear of scandal. Mr. Osborne's financial woes were a powerful temptation, yet his protestations were vehement, even impassioned. Poirot walked to the large French window and looked out upon the gardens. The moon shone bright, casting long shadows. He smiled gently to himself. "Ah, red herrings, you are ever my faithful allies." A nightingale's distant call drifted across the grounds, eerie in its clarity. Poirot's moustaches bristled. The stolen jewel and the vanished bird were entwined in some secret design, yet what played upon the stage was but an opening act. Turning from the window, Poirot examined the small silver salver on which the feather still lay. He recalled the soot that clung to its shaft, the tang of coal and smoke. Where in this idyllic setting would one find smouldering embers? The servants' quarters, perhaps? Or the kitchens themselves? Drifting from thought to thought, Poirot collected his silk gloves and placed them into his coat pocket. He glanced once more at the remnants of dinner, an untouched port, a crushed napkin. All was poised in expectation. Tomorrow's revelations would strike at the heart of deceit, but only if the little grey cells had been well rested. And so, beneath the rattling of the sash windows and the soft stir of ivy in the night wind, Poirot departed the dining room. Each step echoed in the corridor as the game advanced. Hidden in the velvet folds of Trentham Manor were whispers and red herrings aplenty, and Monsieur Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, would unravel them all in due course. Chapter 5: The Nightingale's Cry. Before the first hint of dawn had dissipated the mist, Hercule Poirot stole quietly from his guest suite. The corridors of Trentham Manor were hushed, save for the distant drip of dew from eaves and the low hum of an awakening household. He carried only his brass-handled magnifying glass and a small notebook. In his dressing gown, his moustaches bristled in anticipation of fresh clues. The air in the courtyard was cool, scented faintly of earth and stone. Poirot paused beneath a yew tree, its branches heavy with dew, and considered how even the slightest disturbance, an errant footprint in damp grass, might reveal the path of both jewel and bird. Crossing the lawn, he noted the precision of the gardener's early work, roses pruned to uniform height, gravel raked into immaculate patterns. Yet in one corner of the east terrace, the gravel lay disturbed. Tiny prints, no larger than a child's slipper, led from the marble balustrade toward an ornate stone fountain. Bent over, Poirot studied the tracks, narrow, shallow, with a faint ridge that suggested soft-soled slippers rather than boots. He sketched the pattern, measured the depth with a probe, and photographed the layout in his mind. Type of slipper sold only in Bath, he murmured. One might purchase such indoors, and wear them to avoid detection. On the fountain's rim lay a small scrap of velvet, deep midnight blue, the exact lining of Lady Marigold's private cabinet. Poirot lifted it gingerly on a gloved finger. The fabric was torn, as though caught on the basin's edge when someone stooped perhaps to steady themselves. He turned the scrap over and discovered minute traces of white limestone dust, identical to that on the black feather recovered earlier. Pocketing the fragment, he surveyed the fountain's bowl. The water was still, save for a single ripple where a fallen leaf had settled. No other sign of disturbance. And yet, this scrap told him more than a dozen statements. A few paces away, against the garden wall, stood the gardener's shed. Its door was ajar. Here, Poirot noticed muddy footprints spaced at irregular intervals, as though someone had paused mid-stride and then continued. Inside sat an empty birdcage of delicately wrought iron, its open door swung wide. The shredded velvet cushion that once lined its base lay in a corner, feathers scattered like pale confetti across the floorboards. No sign of the nightingale itself. Poirot's lips curved slightly. The theft of the jewel was entwined with that of the bird. He picked up a single white feather and slipped it into an envelope. He studied the cage's rusted latch, deducing that it had been released from outside, where a small lever might fit. A closer look at the floor revealed a faint chalky residue, perhaps lime wash from the neighboring potting bench. Yet the most telling detail was the absence of a broad opening in the roof. The bird had not flown away, but had been carried off. Poirot sensed an intimate knowledge of every chamber in the manor. The thief knew which door to open and which latch to bypass. By mid-morning, he retraced his steps to the terrace. The eastern sun now illuminated a low wall shrouded in climbing ivy. Poirot, ever methodical, tapped the wall with his cane. The tonal difference, one hollow clang among solid echoes, caught his ear. He bent apart the ivy tendrils and discovered a small, iron-bound door no taller than a man's knee. It was set flush against the stone, its hinges concealed. He knelt to examine it. The latch was of the same make as the bird cage and the cabinet lock. He pressed a small lever, and with a soft click the door swung inward. Inside lay a narrow tunnel, its walls of rough brick, the floor damp with centuries-old moisture. A single beam of daylight slanted through a crack at the far end. Poirot's heart quickened. He had found the secret passage connecting the east wing to the boudoir. He measured the width, just wide enough for an agile person to squeeze through, and noted the arch of the ceiling, low and uneven. Broken shards of plaster lay along the floor, and footprints in dried clay suggested recent passage. He stooped and examined them, boot prints matching Colonel Armitage's size and slight limp. But below, nearer to the boudoir end, were slipper prints, the same narrow pattern he had photographed by the fountain. He paused to touch the brick, feeling its damp coolness. Sympathetic locks, he whispered. Designed for servants in bygone days, now exploited by a cunning hand. He retrieved the limestone dust from his pocket, a pinch of powder from the velvet scrap, and pressed it into the tunnel floor. The dust revealed a third pattern, a faint smear of leather sole, coarse grain, possibly shoes worn by Mr. Osborne. So here had walked not one, but two figures, one in boots, one in slippers, perhaps working in collusion to remove both jewel and bird. Emerging from the tunnel, Poirot surveyed the scene in the bright morning light. The ivy closed behind him, leaving the door hidden once more. He straightened, brushing dust from his gloves, and made a final notation in his notebook. The tunnel explained how the burglar avoided detection, from beneath the boudoir to the garden and the shed, in a silent, subterranean arc. Yet the question remained, who possessed both the physical agility to navigate the passage and the knowledge of its existence? And what was the motive in stealing the Nightingale alongside the pendant? Poirot considered the household's routines. Only a handful of people knew of the tunnel at all, the servants believed it a legend, its entrance long forgotten. Who among them had the boldness to rediscover it? Mrs. Peabody's tenure and deep loyalty made her less suspect of betrayal, but perhaps she knew of hidden passages from years of service. Colonel Armitage, with his wartime experience, might relish the secret route's thrill. Mr. Osborne, more bound by ledgers than by heavy boots, was less likely to crawl through mud and brickwork. Miss Vivian, could she? The slender figure in slippers, the violet-stained gloves, the need to claim a promised inheritance. And yet, the bird's disappearance suggested a more personal act, one tied to fear or obsession. As the manor's first footman began to stir, Poirot replaced his magnifying glass in its case. He turned toward the gardener's shed once more, where the broken cage lay. A deeper symbolism dawned upon him. The nightingale, a creature of song and freedom, had been silenced in the name of human avarice. A dramatic flourish, perhaps, but one that suited a criminal who delighted in misdirection. He pocketed the final feather, knowing that comparison of its microscopic structure in his London laboratory would yield further proof of who handled the bird most closely. With these discoveries, Poirot felt the puzzle's contours sharpen. The tunnel had been the artery, the velvet scrap and dust the veins. The footprints were the lifeblood, vital in connecting one act to the next. He needed now to test his hypothesis against the persons most likely to exploit such a passage. Tomorrow, he would assemble Miss Vivian in the boudoir, request Colonel Armitage's boots for comparison, and question Mrs. Peabody about the old plans she might have glimpsed in her youth. The stage was set for the next act in this drama of shadows and feathered whispers. Turning at last to the manor's great façade, Poirot let the morning sun warm his face. The nightingale has cried its final call, he said softly to himself. But its silence will speak volumes. And with that, he strode back toward the house, each measured step a testament to the unerring logic of his little grey cells. Chapter 6, Unraveling Motives. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of Trentham Manor's library as Hercule Poirot summoned the principal players to a private gathering. The ceiling, painted with muted pastoral scenes, and the rows of leather-bound volumes lent the room an air of genteel discretion. Lady Marigold, pale and anxious, took a seat near the marble hearth. Miss Vivian Trentham perched on an antique settee, hands clasped demurely. Colonel Armitage stood by the window, one hand resting on the sill, while Mr. Osborne settled into a cushioned armchair, his spectacles glittering in the light. Mrs. Peabody hovered at the back, her serene countenance unreadable. Poirot himself positioned a small table at the room's center, upon which lay several items he had requested, a pair of size 6 boots, a silk slipper, a fragment of velvet, and 2 feathers, one black, one white. Miss Amis, he began, his voice calm but commanding, we have progressed from observation to inference. Today, I shall present certain facts and invite each of you to elucidate how these objects came into your possession, or, indeed, why they might not. He tapped the fragment of midnight blue velvet. This scrap originates from Lady Marigold's private cabinet. It was found yesterday by the fountain. Yet, at present, none of you claim to have handled it beyond the boudoir's confines. Monsieur Osborne, you maintain that you never entered that room. Osborne blinked. Indeed, sir. I had no reason to disturb my lady's possessions. My quarrel was with the ledgers only. Poirot's moustaches quivered. And yet, may I ask why you keep a pair of worked gloves bearing traces of wool and leather, traces similar to the ones found on this velvet scrap? He held a pair of sturdy gloves, their palms scuffed. Osborne's face tightened. These are my gardening gloves, he muttered. I use them in the greenhouse. But greenhouse soil is loam, not limestone. Precisely, Poirot nodded. He laid one of the black feathers beside the velvet. And this feather, dipped in coal-black dye, was discovered within the cabinet. Its dye matches exactly the aniline black purchased recently in London's East End. Monsieur Osborne, did you not travel to London last week? The comptroller's cheeks coloured. I had errands to run, yes. But that dye was for my office repairs. Fascinating, Poirot murmured. Yet the bird itself, this white feather, was recovered from the gardener's shed, coated in the same limestone dust. Colonel Armitage, might these boots be yours? He held up the size 6 pair. The colonel frowned, but nodded. Alas, yes. Custom made for my wartime marches. Poirot set them down and produced the delicate silk slipper. And this, I believe, belongs to Miss Vivian. Vivian's breath caught. She took the slipper gently, her fingers tremulous. My aunt seamstress fitted it to me last month, for a recital. Thank you, Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. Now, allow me to reconstruct the events as I understand them. He paced slowly before the hearth. Last night, under cover of darkness, the Ebon Nightingale was removed from its cabinet, and the nightingale itself was taken from its cage. The thief knew of the secret tunnel entrance behind the east terrace, and exploited it to convey both jewel and bird to the gardener's shed. In doing so, 3 persons traversed that route, one in boots, one in slippers, and one wearing gloves. A charged silence filled the room. Poirot raised a gloved finger. Monsieur Osborne, your gloves bear traces of wool and leather, but not the fine silk of this slipper. Colonel Armitage, your boot prints were unmistakable in the tunnel and on the terrace. Miss Vivian, your slipper prints also matched those in the garden. And Mrs. Peabody, he turned to the housekeeper, your resignation at dining last evening suggested kindness, yet you alone among the staff would have known of the tunnel's existence from your youth here. Mrs. Peabody's eyes softened. Monsieur Poirot, I only ever knew of rumors, ghost stories, really. I never believed them. Her voice was steady, but Poirot detected the slightest tremor of her hands. When I saw you investigating in the garden just now, I grew concerned for Lady Marigold's safety. I wished only to assist. Admirable, Poirot allowed. Yet the fact remains that someone guided my hand to this shed's lintel. And someone hid the velvet fragment upon the fountain's rim. Each of you had motive and opportunity. Allow me to consider those motives more closely. He turned to Miss Vivian, whose eyes were cast downward. Mademoiselle, the codicil granting you the pendant was revoked days before the theft. You stand to lose the heirloom forever, and gain nothing save your aunt's displeasure. A strong motive indeed. Vivian's lips quivered. Yes, but I loved the pendant because of its history, soothing, not covetous. I wished only to admire it, not to steal it. Her voice broke slightly, and Lady Marigold reached to take her hand. Poirot then addressed Colonel Armitage. Colonel, your boots traced two paths, one from the terrace to the shed, and another through the tunnel to the boudoir. Your evening walk was plausible, yet those limestone footprints were fresh, and the tunnel's ceiling constricts, hardly the ideal place for one of your build to maneuver with ease. The Colonel's jaw tightened. I admit I entered the tunnel, once as a boy, to retrieve a stray cricket ball. I did not expect it to be used thus. He swallowed. I did not take the pendant nor harm the bird. Finally, Poirot fixed his gaze on Mr. Osborne. Your financial records show distress. You were on the brink of ruin when you believed Lady Marigold would alter her will. You procured the dye, you handled the gloves, and you have the cunning to exploit hidden passages. Osborne leaned forward, his spectacles slipping. You insult me again, Poirot. My honor is intact, Poirot interjected smoothly. Or so you claim. But consider, the only way to cast suspicion upon a favorite niece and a distinguished colonel is to mislead the investigation. By wearing distinctive footwear, you ensure that Monsieur Armitage and Mademoiselle Vivian are implicated. By dyeing a feather and leaving it in the cabinet, you misdirect attention away from your own gloves. No? Lady Marigold gasped, clutching her heart. Poirot raised a hand for calm. We are not yet at the end. But observe carefully the reactions. He produced the final piece of evidence, a page torn from an architectural plan, found in Mrs. Peabody's room. This paper details the tunnel's route. It was hidden among servant notices until yesterday. He placed it before Mrs. Peabody. You found this at last sighting of the Nightingale, did you not? Tears welled in her eyes. I wanted to protect the family's reputation. I feared scandal more than crime. She covered her face with trembling hands. Poirot nodded sympathetically, then turned once more to the company. Thus, each of you had a reason to enter the tunnel. He paused dramatically. But only one of you combined motive, knowledge, and the cunning to thread every clue into an elaborate tapestry of deceit. Tomorrow, I shall confront the guilty party by revealing the final twist that none anticipate. He allowed a faint, inscrutable smile. Until then, I advise you all rest. Your secrets weigh heavily upon each of you, and rest is best taken before the unraveling begins. As he departed the library, the assembled household was left in stunned uncertainty. The static air hummed with unspoken accusations. Each person turned toward the next with questions in their eyes, yet dared not speak. Outside, a lone nightingale chirped faintly, a reminder that, even in silence, truth sings its own inevitable refrain. And so, in the hush of Trentham Manor, Hercule Poirot's little grey cells began their final refinement, sifting ambition from fear, guilt from innocence, until only one undeniable truth remained. Chapter 7, The Grand Confrontation. That evening, as a pale harvest moon rose over Trentham Manor, Hercule Poirot sent word for the household to assemble once more, this time in the boudoir where the crime had occurred. Candles flickered in their wall sconces, casting tall shadows upon the polished mahogany floor. Lady Marigold stood by the cabinet, her face drawn. Miss Vivian Trentham leaned against the dressing-table mirror, fingers nervously twisting. Colonel Armitage hovered near the window. Mr. Osborne paced by the fireplace, spectacles perched at the end of his nose, and Mrs. Peabody waited quietly by the door, her posture composed yet alert. Poirot surveyed each of them, his grey eyes inscrutable beneath their waxed arches. Miss Amis, he began, in his soft, deliberate English, tonight we permit no stone to remain unturned. I shall retrace the steps of the Ebon Nightingale and our little feathered friend, and you will judge for yourselves how the sequence of events could transpire in silence, secrecy, and subterfuge. He walked to the center of the room and tapped the cabinet lock with his cane. This lock, he said, was opened without force. The culprit knew the mechanism from within, and so avoided damage and commotion. He extracted the glass vial containing the coarse grey hair. Within this lock was found a hair of unusual stiffness. Only one among you has moustache hair of comparable thickness. He paused, allowing his glance to rest momentarily on Mr. Osborne, whose hand tightened on his coat lapel. Next, said Poirot, the single black feather, dyed with aniline black, was left here as a red herring. Its vivid hue drew attention to the bird before the duel. But the aniline used is sold only by a small chemist in London's East End, visited recently by one person in this very manner. He produced the tiny prescription docket for aniline dye, dated 5 days past, with Osborne's scrawl upon it. The comptroller's face paled. Poirot moved to the velvet-lined interior of the cabinet, now turned inside out upon a side table. Observe the diagonal creases in the velvet. The scrap of midnight blue lining was caught on the fountain's rim, and bore traces of limestone dust. That dust matches the terrace stones, and the dust found on one person's gloves. He revealed Osborne's gardening gloves, the palms dusted with pallid grit. Osborne opened his mouth, then closed it. Poirot next displayed the silk slipper. This delicate slipper left narrow prints upon the damp grass, running from the terrace to the gardener's shed. Miss Vivian, you wear precisely this fit, yet you deny ever trotting beyond the shuttered music room. Vivian sank into a chair, her cheeks flaming. I borrowed it briefly, she whispered. But I never entered the garden. Poirot's moustaches twitched. And yet your slipper prints were found beside the fountain and upon the terrace. Pray, tell us, why venture into the cold dewy grass at dawn? Vivian's eyes filled with tears, but she would not speak. He turned to Colonel Armitage, placing the size 6 boots upon the table one by one. These boots bear fresh limestone residue, identical to the terrace, and mud matching the gravel path. You confided seeing a shadow near this very window at dusk. Yet your boots also traversed the secret tunnel, as evidenced by the damp clay upon their soles. The Colonel's jaw clenched. I went to inspect the terrace lantern, he said. I had no notion of crime. Poirot strode to the open window. And through this window one could enter the tunnel's inner mouth, unknown to most but recalled by one who knew these halls from youth. He fixed Mrs. Peabody with a steady gaze. You, madam, spoke of legends of hidden passages. But only one person among the staff would have paid heed to such tales, long enough to rediscover them. Mrs. Peabody's hands trembled slightly at her sides. Monsieur, she said softly, I only wished to guard Lady Marigold's interests. My knowledge was idle curiosity, not action. Her voice cracked with emotion. Poirot moved to the birdcage, now empty, perched upon its stand near the chaise longue. The Nightingale was taken, its cage unlocked by a hidden lever, similar in mechanism to this cabinet. The one who manipulated that lever held both the key and the courage to frighten the household by releasing its songbird into darkness. He held aloft the single white feather found in the shed. This feather bore coal dust, yet no soot in the kitchen matches it. Only one place within the grounds, an unused gardener's brazier, could leave such residue. A tense hush fell. Poirot placed the feather beside the others, hair, feather, leather glove, slipper, boots, velvet scrap. Every clue points to a careful, deliberate choreography. The hair identifies the person at the cabinet, the dye the purchaser of the feather, the gloves the handler of the velvet, the slipper and boots the entity that traversed both garden and tunnel, and the feather the one who released the bird. He turned, his gaze sweeping the assembled faces. Which of you, then, orchestrated this symphony of misdirection? Who would benefit most by wrongfully implicating the others, while concealing your own design? He paused, and the flicker of candlelight danced across his own pale forehead. A crime of this nature requires both intimate knowledge of Trentham Manor's hidden passages and the capacity to manipulate trust. It requires cunning. Lady Marigold pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "Monsieur Poirot," she breathed, "I see how each clue aligns, but I cannot believe." Poirot held up a single finger to quiet her. "Madam, faith is a noble sentiment, but faith does not illumine hidden locks. I ask each of you, speak now, confess or exonerate yourselves. The truth will emerge, one way or another." Miss Vivian buried her face in her hands. Colonel Armitage's mouth opened and closed. He looked toward the window, then away. Mrs. Peabody sank to the floor, the locket at her throat glinting. Mr. Osborne stood rigid, his spectacles reflecting the candlelight like tiny false witnesses. Not a syllable crossed their lips. Poirot took a slow step forward, his cane tapping the floor once. "Very well," he said. "You choose silence, and silence will speak for you. Tomorrow, I shall ask for the locks to be reset, the tunnel entrance to be bricked, and the household to remain together. When the key is turned and the final door closed, the guilty heart cannot abide the weight of all evidence combined. Then we shall see who falters first." With that, he bowed with his accustomed courtesy. "Until tomorrow, mon ami. May your consciences find some peace in the night's embrace, though I suspect only one of you will sleep soundly." He swept from the boudoir into the corridor, leaving behind a circle of haunted faces and the soft echo of his departing steps. In the hush that followed, the candle flames wavered, as though uncertain whether to burn on. Each occupant of Trentham Manor looked at the next and saw reflected their own dread. The dance of red herrings and revelations had reached its crescendo, the final note would be struck with the rising sun. And deep within the secret tunnel, hidden beneath the tangled ivy, some sinfully triumphant figure lay in wait, knowing that tomorrow, at last, the daylight would bring justice. Chapter 8, Poirot's Resolution. Dawn's pale light crept through the tall mullioned windows of Trentham Manor, illuminating the boudoir in soft silver. Madame Trentham, Colonel Armitage, Miss Vivian, Mr. Osborne, and Mrs. Peabody assembled once more before the mahogany cabinet where the Ebon Nightingale had vanished. Poirot entered with measured steps, his waxed moustaches perfectly poised. He carried the recovered pendant and, in a glass case, the Nightingale itself, safe and uninjured. The hush that greeted him bespoke both relief and trepidation. Readers of human character, they awaited his final unraveling of the labyrinthine plot. "Miss Amis," Poirot began, his voice gentle yet unassailable, "last night we paused at the threshold of truth. Each of you possessed motive, means, and opportunity, yet only one soul wove these threads into a tapestry of deception. Permit me now to disentangle them." He turned to Lady Marigold. "Madam, you feared scandal more than theft. You entrusted your housekeeper, Mrs. Peabody, with discretion, yet inadvertently provided our culprit with knowledge of your hidden tunnel." Mrs. Peabody's eyes filled with remorse. Poirot smiled kindly. "Your intentions were pure, but you glimpsed the old service plans when tidying the library shelf. You did not commit the crime, but your actions set the stage." He gestured to Mrs. Peabody's gloved hands. "Recall the black feather dyed with aniline, purchased in London by Mr. Osborne under the pretext of office repairs." Mr. Osborne's face betrayed surprise and guilt. Poirot continued, "That feather was a deliberate diversion. The would-be thief hoped suspicion would alight upon a lover of fine curios, our dear controller. And yet your own gloves bore no dye, only garden dust." Poirot stepped to the small table, where the velvet scrap and feathers lay arranged like clues in an algebraic proof. Next, the white feather from the shed, coated in limestone dust. Only one person returned from the terrace to the shed at dawn, Colonel Armitage. Your boots, sir, left unmistakable impressions in both the dew-soft grass and the damp clay of the secret tunnel. You claim to inspect the lantern, yet why traverse the tunnel's cramped passage? The colonel stiffened. I went only out of curiosity, he murmured. I found the tunnel reopened and feared for Lady Marigold's safety. I meant no harm. Poirot's gaze softened. Your heart is loyal, Colonel. You heard a nightingale's call as you passed the cage, and regrettably, sought to free it rather than report the crime. But your intentions were compassionate, not criminal. The Colonel bowed his head in relief. Poirot turned to Miss Vivian, who sat with the delicate slipper in hand. Mademoiselle, your inheritance was revoked. You coveted the pendant, yet your tears reveal genuine distress, not duplicity. Your violet-scented gloves and silk slipper prints drew suspicion, but the violet smell stemmed from your nighttime rosewater, and you wore the slippers only to avoid creaking boots on the parquet. Vivian's relief was evident. I loved the pendant's history, not its wealth, she whispered. I could not bear its removal, but I did not take it. Finally, all eyes turned to Mr. Osborne. Poirot held out the pendant. Monsieur, your financial straits grew dire when you believed the Ebon Nightingale would pass to your niece. You resolved to sell it abroad, funding your debts. You studied the cabinet's mechanism, retrieved from family papers you accessed for ledger audits. You dyed the feather to mislead, left your gloves dust as false proof, and guided each probe away from your trail. You even bribed Felix the gardener to carry the birdcage's key, ensuring the nightingale's disappearance would further bewilder us. Mr. Osborne trembled, his composure crumbling. Yes, he confessed hoarsely. I meant only to raise money and restore the household's finances. I did not wish to harm the bird, but the jewel's sale seemed the swiftest remedy. He sank into his chair, tears staining his cheeks. Poirot nodded gravely. Votre honnêteté, at last, brings peace. The pendant and the bird are restored, your debts will be addressed through other channels, preventing scandal. Lady Marigold, you may rest assured the household's harmony is preserved. With a gesture as elegant as a conductor's flourish, Poirot returned the pendant to Lady Marigold's outstretched hand. He lifted the glass case, releasing the nightingale back to its perch. The bird stirred, as though acknowledging the detective's triumph, and broke into a single, clear note, its song more precious for having been momentarily silenced. Stepping back, Poirot addressed the assembled company. Thus we see that crime, like music, can be orchestrated to deceive the ear. But the heart of truth cannot be stifled. Our little grey cells have sung the final chorus. He inclined his head to each in turn, forgiveness for the misguided, gratitude for the compassionate, a gentle admonition for the repentant. Lady Marigold, Colonel Armitage, Miss Vivian, and Mrs. Peabody each offered Poirot heartfelt thanks. Even Mr. Osborne, chastened though relieved, expressed profound remorse and vowed restitution. In the soft afterglow of resolution, the household felt its bonds reforged stronger than before. As Poirot took his leave, he paused in the hallway, his cane tapping lightly on the marble floor. He turned, moustaches quivering in a final smile. Madam, Colonel, Miss, Monsieur, you have all played your part in this grand drama. Let us hope that the next mystery you encounter is less personal. With a gracious bow, he departed into the morning sun, his silhouette vanishing beyond the manor's great doors. Behind him, Trentham Manor exhaled a contented sigh. The corridors and secret tunnels lay silent once more, the shadows banished by truth's illumination. And in the stillness, the nightingale sang again, a testament to the enduring power of justice, compassion, and the unparalleled brilliance of Hercule Poirot.